All right. Well, my name is Scott Chiaveri. I'm the founder and CEO of Mito Red Light. I'm really excited to have a conversation with my longtime friend, Brian Simonis. So, Brian, and we're here to talk about the RLT plus hair mist that we developed to augment the benefits of the red light therapy, red laser helmet that we sell, that I might as well put on and do a session here. So Brian is the brilliant developer of the RLT plus hair mist formula. Actually, let me stop this because I should probably put some hair mist on my scalp before I do my my laser session. So I wanted to sit down and talk with Brian about, well, firstly, your background and what causes hair loss, and then why you picked the ingredients in the hair mist that you did. So that's kind of the structure for today's discussion. So Brian, I'm excited to talk with you. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I guess if we could start with your background, if you could just explain, how you got interested in hair loss and how long ago and how you started researching it, and maybe just give a little background on that.
Yeah, sure. Great to be here, Scott. Best of my memory goes, I somehow remember being somewhere between 19 and 20, and this is way back in early 90s. I might be wrong on the math there. Honestly, I haven't really done the math on that, but I started just thinking, wow, what's the deal? Father, uncles, you name it, all the sort of things you hear about with these relatives. Okay, I see where this is going. People say, oh, you're going to look like your grandfather later. Oh, no, not on my watch. Absolutely not going to be happening. It's just one of these things where maybe I'm not going to have the face or the hair, the head shape to sort of deal with that. So for me, it's just like, no, I gotta do what I can. I don't know. But in those days, you just had minoxidil. Finasteride was not even on the market. We had, if anything, in the natural world, scalp cleansers. So in theory there, of course, is you got this buildup of sebum. And that's really all there was available in the market. So I just did all kinds of interesting experiments. And unfortunately, this was well before the internet came out. So matter of going to the archives, the library, looking in the medical literature, anything I can get my hands on. And unfortunately, there was not really a lot to be found. Now, there was a lot of amazing information, but not all of it was that easy to retrieve. Making a short story longer, I did eventually come or uncover some incredible information. I later on worked at the largest integrative medical clinic in the Northern Hemisphere. We had a team of fantastic physicians. I kind of wondered, well, what's the latest? Well, no one really seemed to care. I guess I was a little bit extra concerned about what causes hair loss. No one really just seemed to think it was any big deal. Maybe it was just something that happens. I thought there's got to be some reason, because it just doesn't make any sense. Why do we have hair that just disappears on the sides of our head, or what's with a horseshoe pattern, whatever? So I made it essentially a goal, an obsessive goal, to figure this out. And so it took several stages of constant levels of epiphany, correction. We never get everything right the first time. We're constantly relearning, re-examining. That's just really how it is. So it's just a constant level of trying to understand the minutia, I guess. So eventually I made small milestones, sometimes later breakthroughs, greater understandings, constant experimentation. I'd never actually touched into pharmaceuticals because I wasn't a big fan of the obvious side effects that some people experienced. And so I really wanted to know, not to be bothered with what could happen if I had hair growing out of weird places from minoxidil or finasteride. As you probably know, it's a bit of Russian roulette with the endocrine system. Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, you name it. It's like you're going to push the roulette wheel and you don't know it's going to come off red, black, or some off number, and who knows what's going to happen. So I didn't want to leave it to fate. So hopefully that covered that.
Yeah, got it. So probably for a little bit more background for the viewer, you and I met over the internet in around 2007, 2008 timeframe. And I was in my early 30s at the time, and I started to lose my hair. and I found your forum, which the Natural Hair Regrowth Forum, or Immortal Hair. I found that forum, and now I found it in 2007, 2008. When did you start that forum?
So I started that forum in 2008, but I was already
Okay.
a very frequent visitor of a forum rather before that, maybe one or two. And I guess I got a little bit concerned with some of the easiest way I can say is maybe just the political direction. So I really felt like I didn't want to be censored anyway. I want to have more voice under, let's say, an umbrella of the natural inclination. So
Yep.
that's why I started the forum in 2008.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, I didn't realize you started it the same year that I found it. I guess I just got lucky that I lost my hair. Like I started to lose my hair at that time, because so I must have found it like not long after it was started. So you and I have been friends since 2008, and at the time you had developed a kind of a supplement protocol, so different molecules or substances or botanicals that you can swallow that would address different kind of mechanisms for hair loss. And so, we were taking different supplements that you recommended, and I noticed that it helped. And even back then, I mean, this is 16 years ago now, you were so incredibly knowledgeable about everything with hair loss. And so that's why when we started offering a laser helmet, and I said, well, I wonder if we can develop a formula that can augment the benefits of the laser helmet for hair loss, you were obviously the person that I reached out to, because you're the most knowledgeable person in hair loss that I've ever met. And probably, when I talk to people, I say, if you're probably one of the top 5 most knowledgeable people on planet Earth when it comes to hair loss, in terms of the drivers and the countermeasures. So you're an obvious person to help with this. So that's just some background for the viewers. So let's showcase a little bit of your knowledge. Can we talk about the drivers of hair loss and how they're different for men and women? Because both men and women can struggle with hair loss. So I'm curious if you can articulate for us what the drivers are.
Sure. Well, believe it or not, one of the cornerstones of what happens for most people is the same effect in both men and women. It's just that the age, in terms of hormone regulations and change of life, are going to be at different stages. You essentially have several different drivers. I'm just going to cover the basic primary ones. So, for example, let's say if we take a woman from a hormonal perspective, usually when they're going to hit into menopause, this is where various things are going to be dropping off hormonal wise. Their iron is going to start to hyperconcentrate. This is not something that happens during menstruation because they're bleeding out all the time. But once they hit the menopause and you have a cease of menstruation, then that's when the iron is going to start to build up. So that's going to exacerbate or put them in a whole new time where they've never had to worry about hair is not going to be a thing of mass concern. And there's polyovarian syndrome. I'm sorry, you might want to edit that out. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS. This is where if a woman's blood sugar metabolism is off, that's a whole other hyperandrogenism. That's going to affect women much earlier. But anyway, if we get to men, so there's something that occurs between the ages of 7 and 8, was a maturation of your mandible. Essentially, what's going to determine whether you are a skeletal class 1, which is perfect architecture, your bite is perfect, versus a skeletal class 2, which is where you maybe have an overbite. So most people today have an abnormal occlusion, which is called skeletal class 2. So essentially an overbite. And so that is unfortunately going to affect the architecture and increase the chances of male pattern baldness at some point in your life, just based on your lifestyle choices.
Okay, that's super interesting, and I've never heard that before. So I want to circle back though, because my understanding, which admittedly is very superficial, I come back to, I guess, inflammation, and I think of inflammation within the hair follicle. So, is that a fair statement that that's the what's going on in the follicle, like chronic inflammation within a hair follicle that causes it to essentially die off over time. And if that's true, is what's happening with what you described with just the hormonal changes in women, and then even the facial structure, is that contributing to the inflammation in the follicle?
In some ways. So yeah, inflammation is a great way to just create a broad view or a broad brush of it. So to get more into the minutia, and actually there's so much to it, I'm just going to really just try to cut it down as deeply as I can. So for example, you have this alleged molecule that's bad called dihydrotestosterone, as we've all probably heard at some point or the other. That's probably not even worth really discussing too much. Ultimately, what happens is you pointed about the inflammation. So if you have, let's say, if you have a chronic level of insulin, maybe that's higher than it should be, that's going to create some form of oxidative stress or some sort of chronic inflammation. So when there's a level of chronic inflammation, that's going to affect something called IGF-1 or insulin growth factor 1. If you don't have enough IGF-1 available, then hair simply will not grow. So when they introduce ideas like DHT or dihydrotestosterone, what that's actually doing is it's inhibiting the IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1, which actually allows the hair to grow. So in interesting research, they found that even if they took animals and they used a very powerful anti-androgen, if their IGF-1 levels were already low, it simply had no effect at all. So from a natural treatment perspective, you want to actually give something to that person that's going to invigorate or stimulate the IGF-1 response, not just blunt the androgen, hoping that there's going to be enough growth factor. And I'm just simplifying it, but yes.
I got you. Okay, so that's interesting. So so the IGF-1 story, is that the same for men and women? Because I know DHT is more of the male story. We hear that, and that's why, if I'm not mistaken, Finasteride blocks DHT production systemically. So you're saying that the way that works is you block DHT, and there's less IGF-1 inhibition, which I mean it's a growth factor, so that kind of makes sense. It's a growth factor. Apparently, it's related to hair loss, hair growth. But you're saying that that's only a partial solution because you need to make sure that you have enough IGF-1 around in the first place. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. So let's say if we talk about, say, dutasteride, known as Avodart, or Finasteride, known as Propecia, one that's going to have a higher inhibiting effect over, let's say, there's two different types of 5-alpha reductase enzymes. You've got a type 1 and a type 2. So they might have a higher level of inhibition. So dutasteride is sort of like a double inhibition of two different enzymes, whereas finasteride has just one. However,
Brian,
doing is
Brian, just to level set. So those enzymes, they convert testosterone to DHT? Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, right. So the way they work is by inhibiting the conversion of testosterone to DHT. So they're reducing DHT.
That's correct. So ultimately what happens is it gets a little bit more complicated as far as just talking about blocking enzymes and things of that nature. We can get more into that if you like, but ultimately what's going to happen though is you asked about, let's say, males versus females. So for example, if you look at female beard hair, like on our faces, males, it actually likes the DHT. So there's definitely sexual differences in how these things are interpreted or the signaling pathways, but there's so much more to it. So we can get into, so if we look at a non-hormonal component, for example, you have all these different effects, whether you're a man or a woman, but ultimately what happens if there's a lot of chronic inflammation, whether it's, say, lifestyle related. So if we look at the architecture first, that may set the stage for, like there's an artery called superficial temporal artery, and there's others. And essentially, because the architecture changes, it's going to invite later on, if maybe the age is correct or the inflammation or lifestyle conditions are there, to simply exacerbate a situation. We're going to have these things called inflammatory cytokines. You can call them inflammatory prostaglandins. They all have different names, different purposes, but ultimately it's going to create that inflammation and essentially create hair follicle assassins. So One of the more common ones is called methylproteinase 9.
MMP9.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. There's also stuff like for the face, which I know that the lasers help, MMP1. So that degrades collagen. So you want to generally inhibit those enzymes. They're going to dissolve or degrade collagen. So you can think of MMP9 as a hair follicle assassin.
Okay. All right. Well, that's so how do we take out the hair follicle assassins then? Are there certain molecules, substances that inhibit that MMP9?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And just for the sake of time and everything else, it was quite shocking to me 25 years ago, I think at least, when I starting to become aware of just the vast level of signaling pathways. It just goes on endlessly what affects the hair follicle. It's really, truly remarkable and head spinning, to say the least. So there's a number of incredible botanicals. It took a really long time to identify what actually takes care of some of these things. Like, I'll give you an example. There's another molecule called DKK1. If you look at the palm of your hand, you'll see there's no hair on it. And so we got a lot of DKK1 on there.
Interesting.
So one of the ingredients in the RLT Mist Plus, or Plus Mist rather, is it actually deals with this DKK1. So it'll allow the hair to grow, or otherwise just say, no, you're forbidden. So you're going to be a desert wasteland forever. So it'll help stimulate the hair. Well,
which ingredient is that?
So that's called Scutellaria Baicalensis. It's also known as Baicalin for short. All different kinds of ways. There's actually other names for this as well. And it's got a long traditional, I guess in Asian countries, rather, have a very long history for different medicinal effects.
Yep. So it's antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and you're saying it also acts on this DKK1.
Yeah, it handles so many different signaling pathways. You just sound like a bunch of Greek. So the real key was, how do you assemble something that is not only going to be cohesive and essentially workable, because it's difficult to combine multiple ingredients and to have them not either cancel each other out, or maybe there's pH differences, whatever. So you want to have something that's complementary. And apparently, it took us quite a long time to get this right. So,
So that's a good segue. So again, I came to you well over a year ago, and I said, we have a laser helmet, and I want to design the best topical formula that we can to support hair growth and synergize with the effects of the red laser, the red light on the scalp. So, and I basically, it was a very open-ended request on my side, where I said, you can create anything you want, put any ingredient you want. Let's not be bound by cost or availability. Let's just design the best possible formula that we can come up with based on your, nearly 3 decades of experience learning about the causes of hair loss. So when I asked you that, I'm wondering if you could share kind of how you approached that.
Okay, so for me, I don't want to say it was easy necessarily, but the thought was, I've always made it a point to scan the medical literature. I mean, it's almost like, I would say it's sort of like I'm compelled to do it. I want to see what the latest information is available out there. So it's always been intriguing and fascinating for me just to understand everything as much as I possibly can. And for lack of a better word, the science, I guess you can say, it's increasing its level of understanding of the complexity. Sometimes there's something that's elegantly simple, it just seemed complex before because there were just a lot of mysteries involved. So because I had the benefit of just looking at all the literature available, including the ones that date way back over a century, and there's a number of incredible papers in the 60s and 70s, especially. If you had time to get into that, I could. Just truly incredible stuff. So I thought, all right, well, we can definitely sort some ingredients together potentially? How do we get the highest quality ingredients put together? How do we be certain that they're compatible? How and all these other little small things to get into. So eventually, in fact, Scott knows more about this story because he had to deal with a lot of these details himself. It's just the something that looks like it'd be as simple on the surface ended up being not so simple after all.
Right, right. Well, in the sense that you probably, when I came to you, you probably immediately had a list of ingredients in your mind, but there's a big difference between just having a laundry list of potential ingredients and actually translating that into a workable formula, with shelf stability and the right concentrations of the ingredients, et cetera, and also the right texture and we want it to absorb and to even smell the right way and feel the right way. So all of that actually takes quite a bit of time.
Yeah, actually, I couldn't have said it better than I could not have said it better. And yet you hit on absolutely every important point. Yeah, you get into like, what is the actual medicinal quality? What is the, as far as what's going to penetrate, what is the efficacy? What's the biological half-life? I mean, what's the shelf life? All these things, obviously the pH, everything. So it really took quite a bit longer than I anticipated, and I'm sure all involved.
Okay, well, the wonderful thing is that we're done and we're on the other side of it, and we have this amazing formula. So let's talk about. I'd like to talk about some of the ingredients. I mean, and peppermint oil, from my standpoint, is my favorite ingredient, and I just love the way it feels. And even now, I probably sprayed this on about 20 minutes ago, and I still have this really nice cooling sensation on my scalp. I really enjoy it, and I actually look forward to spraying this on my scalp twice a day. So let's tell me about peppermint oil. What was why did you want to include that?
So that was not any of my. That was never like a hyper focus or a target over the years. It's just that when you're looking at the medical literature, as often as I am, you're sort of forced to kind of look into things maybe you weren't really focused on so much before. Just understanding. What is the concentration gradient? What is the amount that's going to do this versus the other thing? So what really caught my attention was maybe three things. Number one, it's, if you interpret this the way I interpret it, it's going to be at least as effective as minoxidil, but actually probably slightly better. That's also interesting. As Scott had mentioned already, I completely concur. When you spray it on the scalp, you have this incredible cooling sensation. I would say it's almost therapeutic in a sense, and I can get into that in a second, because there's just things, there are these shedding cycles during the summer, and I learned this quite a long time ago, just embarking on all these different papers and looking at them and realizing, wow, there's, just like an animal that has a winter coat during the hot or summer months, it's going to shed that winter coat and then eventually regrow that winter coat. Now, it's not quite that nice for us per se. But there actually is a hot or warm summer shedding that occurs for hair follicles. So this has to do with heat shock proteins. So when you involve the peppermint oil in there, not only going to give you an effect that's kinder than minoxidil, but it's going to be a pleasant effect, and it's going to have a really nice mental and overall just nice sensation. Because you have a nice cooling sensation, and that's going to minimize the heat shock proteins involved, and it's going to actually blunt the androgen response. So it's like a safer way of dealing with DHT without going in places you'd rather not go.
Got it. Yeah. So we'll the minoxidil. It was a mice study where it looks like they compared peppermint oil and minoxidil, and they found that in that one particular study, the peppermint oil was actually superior as far as the hair growth. I'll throw in this one quick disclaimer. We haven't done any clinical studies on the formula yet, although that is in the pipeline. So we're not making any claims with respect to the formula, but we are explaining the logic for the ingredients, and we will do some studies. But that is an interesting study in 2014 comparing peppermint oil and minoxidil. It's always funny to me just to see these types of studies. We really do live in an amazing time where there's just so much research being done And as a quick aside, when I started MitoRed in 2019, I remember saying, oh, there are like 4,500 studies in photobiomodulation. And I was like, there's a lot of study. I mean, there's been a lot of scientific research on the and light and biology, which is essentially what photobiomodulation is. And now there are close to 8,000 studies, right? So in a short 6-year time period, we've gone from 4,500 to 8,000. And so it's pretty amazing just the rapid kind of increase in human knowledge and so it's and with the internet and just with 8 billion people on the planet, there's a lot of research going on, and so it doesn't surprise me to see a study in mice comparing peppermint oil and minoxidil, of all things, for hair growth. So okay, so and also, I mean, I just love the way it smells too. I mean, it just has a very nice, reminds you of Christmas type smell. Okay, so we covered peppermint oil. What about what are some other ingredients we want to talk about? You mentioned Scutellaria Baicalensis. How about tea tree? You put tea tree in there. What were you thinking about tea tree oil?
Okay, so that's really more of a minor supportive ingredient. It's basically antimicrobial, antibacterial, and in particular, antifungal.
Yep.
So depending on lifestyle issues or the elements or the humidity, other things like that, there's going to be a level of scalp fungus in certain individuals based on their diet and other things. So that's going to be acting at that capacity. That's more of a supportive ingredient, not really a primary ingredient. I should mention also that there is additional studies on peppermint oil, actually even on human beings as well. But these are preliminary studies, but it does show that there's efficacy. So that was really the weight. I really try not to put everything based on animal studies. Animal studies is more of like a preliminary way to just show potentially, we don't know if it could be extrapolated for humans. So everything, in my opinion, formula-wise, it has to have some evidence for humans to work, really.
Got it. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. But that one study you highlighted to me because they literally compared it to minoxidil. So that's why you called it out. So, all right. So tea tree, and I'm familiar with tea tree being a powerful antifungal. I actually put a couple of drops of tea tree in the mouthwash that I use, just to keep the fungal stuff at bay in the oral cavity. And also, I really like the way that smells as well. How about burdock root?
Yeah, so interesting about that one. So that is, it's, I guess you could say it's the common action that we're looking for. What it's most notably going to be doing is it's going to inhibit the superoxide radical. So it's going to increase superoxide dismutase, otherwise known as SOD. So there's this thing called the hydroxy radical, which is a product of iron oxidation. And so this is one of these things that just essentially is a basic way to create the hair follicle assassination, just very basic. I'll give you an example of this in the real world. If you look at someone who has Hashimoto's disease, they're going to produce an excess amount of hydroxy radicals. And so there's a substance called thyroglobulin, which is essentially a thyroid component. So you're going to have less of that. Without that, you're not going to make a lot of hair. And part of the reason you're not having a lot of that is because of the hydroxy radicals. So that's what the burdock root is for.
Interesting. So I'm actually, there's a little bit of a tangent. I'm actually familiar with the hydroxy radical and hydrogen water. I don't know if you're familiar with hydrogen water, but we have a hydrogen water bottle. If I'll send you one if you'd like. And what the way that I understand that it works is by creating free hydrogen in the water, hydrogen gas, which you drink and diffuses into your system rapidly as a gas, and then it combines with the hydroxy radical OH. So you've got H plus OH equals water. So it essentially neutralizes the hydroxy radical by when it combines with the free hydrogen. So that's interesting about burdock root as well, helping to neutralize that. So, my understanding is that's one of the worst free radicals that we have. And so, okay, how about Go-To Cola.
Okay, so that is something that shows a lot of strong support in the vascular system. So a lot of times people think of it as something that's they want to preserve their collagen or their tissue in some way, or the keratin. So that's going to sort of help preserve against the elements specifically meaning lifestyle habits that involve inflammation. And really, unless you're in a cave, isolated from everything, it's really hard to avoid these things.
Yep.
But, I mean, it really even gets down to the air you're breathing, honestly. There has been some incredible Asian studies. They're really good about hair loss, I have to say. Just because they're breathing so much fine particles in the air, the amount of pollution can be seen with the naked eye. So, for example, so these small particles generate, I was mentioning this earlier, the methylproteinase 9, in other words, the hair assassin again, just by breathing in fine particles. So that's just one example of something, despite how perfect we might eat, organic, whatever it is, there's still sort of an invisible threat just by breathing. And so that's one of the ingredients that will help support, again, that kind of assault on a regular breathing basis in and out.
Got it. Okay, I'm looking at the ingredients here. What else? I'm just picking them rapid fire. How about holy basil or Tulsi?
So yeah, that is essentially, it accomplishes several different things at once. So I remember about 15 years ago, there was a landmark study, at least in my opinion, based on the fact that hair follicles actually have their own internal hypothalamic adrenal axis. Like what did I say again? Yeah, so in other words, besides the fact we have our own thyroid, our own hypothalamus, we have our own adrenal systems, the hair follicles themselves are a mini organ complex. So if we are under stress, we're going to produce something called corticotropin releasing hormone, sometimes called CRH. Sometimes they call it corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF. So what Tulsi does is it inhibits an enzyme called 11 HSD, or rather 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. So what that does is it prevents the conversion of cortisol to cortisone. So ultimately what happens is when it comes down to stress, whether it's corticotropin releasing factor, corticotropin releasing hormone, it's going to prevent ultimately this from happening. Imagine you're having a tough, difficult day at the office, whatever it is, stuck in traffic, maybe really had a hard day emotionally, whatever it is. When you're under stress, your hypothalamus is going to produce this adrenocorticotropin releasing hormone. And then there's going to be a cascade of events, and your hair is actually just going to unplug. So it could be that bad we're going to just kick in a stage. So normally you have a growth phase called an anagen. You also have a catagen stage, which is the sleeping stage of the follicle. And then you have a telogen stage, which is sort of an in-between stage of essentially doing nothing. So normally the growth phase is going to be 9 months of growing. And then the catagen stage is going to be usually typically between 1 and 3 months. Same with the telogen stage, between 1 and 3 months. So when you're under a high level of chronic stress, that entire hair cycle from growth to falling out to resting, they're just going to be inverted. So the resting stage is going to go to 9 months rather than the 1 to 3 months. And so when that's reversed, it just feels like, what's going on? My hair's not growing enough to keep up with these doing nothing or falling out stages. So that's going to really put the brakes on that other form of gasoline, sort of like adding fuel to the fire. In this case, it's stress fuel.
Got it. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, first of all, that was a great explanation. I mean, look, it's been common knowledge for as far back as I can remember that stress causes hair loss, right? And so you're saying this is one of the key ingredients for counteracting, chronic stress or specifically the effect of cortisol on hair loss.
Yes. So another example into that, it was really quite quick segue before I get back into that, is that for decades, as you just said, everyone sort of knew, but everyone just said in the scientific realm, well, we don't really know. It's like, what do you mean you don't know? Isn't it obvious that stress plays a role? And I guess they don't want to admit what seems very obvious until it's really well vetted. But
right, or until they can articulate the mechanisms.
There you go.
Mechanisms, right?
Perfectly stated that. I'm 100% exactly what you said, an expert. So basically just had to establish the basis of the mechanisms. What is the actual effects with the cascading effects. So they
Right.
can say, okay, we understand the process. So that was only been supported through that point and just kept going beyond, beyond, beyond. And oh, just one other example there is that, for example, if your body is trying to decide on, okay, let's say if you're producing a certain amount of progesterone, that's a hormone that's produced both for male and females, by the way. It's not specifically to females only. So if you're under a lot of stress, whether you're a male or a female, again, your progesterone production is going to be cut short. And instead of that, it's going to sacrifice that and produce more cortisol. Now, why is that bad? Because, well, number one, you're going to have less of a resilience to stress. So you're just going to feel higher weight of anxiety, a higher weight of insomnia. And that kind of goes to other areas. For example, one of the things I didn't mention to Scott, but I think he knows this maybe already, is I spent well over a decade. I don't know how long anymore. I really lost count how long, but I've done several hundred consultations on hair. I mean, a lot of it's all about different health aspects.
Right.
I understand you understand all kinds of parts about the human body and the mechanisms to understand everything. So hair loss, of course, was always more of like a special interest of mine, but it helps to be interested in other health situations. But what I really learned or gleaned after all these interviews really is that, wow, there's a high proportion of people who simply do not sleep well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one of the potential risk factors. So anything's going to cut your stress absolutely is going to help.
Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, and sleep is so critical in terms of like your resilience to stress. For me, it's black and white. If I have a good night's sleep, I definitely have a much higher tolerance for stress. And if I have a poor night's sleep, I snap quite easily. So, okay. So first of all, I really appreciate kind of going through we just highlighted some ingredients and you're just kind of riffing on your knowledge, just, stream of consciousness style, which, I mean, we didn't really prepare much of a framework for the discussion. I just thought I could sit down with you and pick your brain because I know just how incredibly knowledgeable you are. I think to wrap it up, though, I'm curious about your thoughts on the synergy of the formula and red light. So part of what we're trying to do is as a red light therapy company is offer our customers things that we think complement red light therapy or potentially could enhance the benefits of red light therapy. So we're working on a skin serum, and in the past we've done a product study where we looked at using a high antioxidant skin serum before using red light. And in that product study, we saw improved benefits to the skin by doing that. And the hypothesis is that the red light does increase ATP, so it does increase some free radicals, so that if you have some exogenous antioxidants in the skin available to put out the little bit of fire, that you might see an increased net benefit from the red light. So that's the hypothesis, and a couple of studies seem to support that hypothesis. I do notice that a lot of the botanicals in the formula do have high antioxidant capacity, so that potentially could be one way that they synergize, similar to how the skin studies that we've seen. But so I'm curious on your thoughts on how the formula would synergize with red light to improve hair growth, and just any other thoughts you have on that topic.
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good point you just made about that. And that this synergy, we really put some thought into this, not just the hair products in particular, but as Scott just mentioned about these other, I consider it sort of like an enhancement, essentially, or a synergistic approach from the red light therapy in the skin, for example. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. So one of the benefits of whether it's a helmet or just the red light therapy itself, it does increase this nitric oxide benefit. And that, of course, is a short-term chemical gas, which is an anti-inflammatory. Under certain conditions, let's say if you're eating a specific type of food, it may actually create a dark side of the nitric oxide. I don't know if this is not something that's generally talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. However, there are certain ingredients that are going to synergistically block out the negative effect. And so this is generally to say maybe someone slips up, eats a diet, maybe they regret, I don't know, whatever it is. There's different ways to provoke the dark side of nitric oxide. For example, they call it inducible nitric oxide synthase. That's the enzyme pathway. So these other ingredients would help blunt potential negative. The other, of course, as Scott pointed out, is the antioxidant effect. So there's these, what's really nice is overall, this is what's called a hormetic effect, meaning there's a little bit of something in there that you can call it almost, I don't even want to use the word bad. It's almost like a stimulator that says, hey, look, to the body, I need to do more of this to improve the collagen, the elastin, the integrity of the skin. And so when I was amazed, actually, just through looking at the research, I was like, wow, these laser products actually are incredible for the skin. A lot of people don't even, I don't think they actually understand that, because I remember when I was a kid, and just the idea of going in high school back in those days, there'd be all these girls hitting tanning lamps. And we all just thought, oh, isn't that bad for you? And then those are the dark days. We didn't know anything in that. So the know-how and the understanding of the benefits are just incredible now. So now it's just about like, how do you augment? And so one other thing I should point out, this is kind of getting back to not just the hair product, but the skin product as well, is that there's these mesenchymal stem cells, in this respect to both hair and skin. And so they actually have a level of vigor, if you like. They have a life cycle. So the more inflammation that they are under siege or under assault through lifestyle or some other sort of situation, their life vigor is going to be limited. So if you use the laser products and or the synergistic products, that's going to essentially awaken them, revitalize them, and it's going to put a lot more life. So that's actually one of the things that in theory helps with the hair follicles, is that you are engendering the vitality. And I'm saying that, I'm trying to use that in the most literal, purest form possible, because what I often had told people in the past is, if these mesenchymal stem cells are essentially sick, they're not going to produce much of a hair follicle. And the same thing with the skin as well. They're just loaded with these things. And so their health is entirely dependent on what we're eating, how we're interacting. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if you've ever spoke about endocrine disruptors, but as you know, if you're putting any sort of potential toxic substance on the skin, there's a lot of controversy these days about skin tan lotions, things that are going to be blocking ultraviolet.
Yep.
As you know, the catch-22 there are some good aspects of ultraviolet radiation. You really want to be blocking that. Number two, you really want these chemicals in there that are endocrine disruptors that could actually create effects that may in fact be negative long-term.
Yep, got it. Yeah, so I appreciate you mentioning nitric oxide, because I agree with you. You know, I think all too often what I see in the health world is we just kind of we like to label things, you know, good or bad, and we have a very like kind of black and white attitude. Nitric oxide is such a good example. You know, I think most people, they think of nitric oxide as good, and it's because, you know, it increases vasodilation and circulation, and they think about beets, and they think about the muscle pump and arginine and all this. But it's really about having the right, having it in the right times and in the right places. And then if it's, you know, what, but for example, you don't want too much nitric oxide inside the mitochondria competing to be bound with cytochrome C oxidase to make ATP. And that's actually part of how red light works, is that actually unbound. So cytochrome C oxidase and nitric oxide are bound together. Red light goes into the cell and literally shakes them apart so that cytochrome C oxidase can bind with oxygen to make ATP. And that's one of the main mechanisms of red and near infrared light and the benefits. And so that's an example of where having too much nitric oxide would not be a good thing, because it's literally inhibiting ATP synthesis inside the cell, inside the mitochondria. So it's really contextual. You know, it can be good, but there can also, like you said, be a dark side of nitric oxide. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, in fact, what you just spoke about is a really fantastic way to sort of explain just everything, whether it's skin health or hair health. Is a lot of people initially, when they get into some bit of research, they don't understand that everything is just not simply binary black or white, ones and zeros. It's actually far more complex. There's intermediate dependence on everything. So for example, if you were to produce, let's say if you took a bunch of ornithine or citrulline, which are nitric oxide precursors, you could actually create more prostaglandin D2, which is another, quote, hair follicle assassin, if you like, or an
Great.
icosapent. So there's all these things that just have to be expressed, and they're there for a reason. It's just that, yeah, there's just no true good or bad to everything. There's just something that's going to be more about essentially a body response modifier. In fact, it's similar to the word biomodulation. It's simply allowing your body to favorably change in its own benefit as opposed to being stuck in some little compartment. So, for example, in typical allopathic medical model, they're going to use a shot of cortisone or prednisone, for example, which is synthetic cortisone, and that's going to shut off your inflammation. But even inflammation has a benefit.
Right.
So it's better to biomodulate as opposed to just shut off.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And generally speaking, I mean, although there is a time and place for, some heavy-handed interventions, but in day-to-day life, I'm with you on the biomodulation approach rather than the heavy-handed approach. So, okay, so I want to wrap it up, but I also I don't want to. Presumably, folks watching this will be interested in what they can do to mitigate hair loss, and so obviously, we're suggesting the mist. And obviously, we believe red and red light and red laser light is super beneficial for hair, for the follicular health and for hair growth. But since I have you here and you are one of the most knowledgeable people on planet Earth when it comes to the drivers of hair loss, I can't not ask you for your top 2 or 3 recommendations outside of the mist and the and red light laser helmet. Like if I'm struggling with hair loss and I'm doing the mist and I'm doing that laser helmet, what are the top 2 or 3 things that I should also be doing to try to make sure that my hair goes back?
Okay, sure. So I'm going to make just a couple more other remarks because I really only got into the so-called hormonal effects of hair loss. So, for example, there were some studies essentially back in the 60s and 70s where they like guided some arteries essentially to prevent blood flow through a superficial temporal artery. And by doing that, they essentially stopped all hair loss, but only about 75% of the participants. So what about the other 25%? What was going on there? So turns out that missing link is usually the gut integrity. So especially these days, if you look, ever since 1995 and onward, we've had the beginning of maybe just this epidemic of gut dysfunction.
Yep.
I don't know if we can blame it on the herbicides or the fertilizers or the various additives in the foods, whatever, but we've just had a lot of people with digestive issues. So we have these,
right. So Crohn's, IBS, I mean, all of these things.
One of these catch-all terms, irritable bowel syndrome. And honestly, they don't actually.
I don't remember ever hearing about them growing up, and now I know so many people that struggle.
Yes. So because of that, a lot of supplements that you take orally are just not going to do really much of anything if you've got a gut dysfunction. And you can almost say, well, who doesn't have some level of gut dysfunction these days if you're eating a pretty wide variety of diet? I mean, there's probably exceptions, and I can point that out if you like. So a real easy thing I would recommend if I suspect there's any gut dysfunction anywhere, they probably want to find themselves a really high quality colostrum product, take it for 6 months. What that does is it eventually helps seal up the loose gut junctions. So over that time, that's going to produce less inflammation, and some of what you actually are taking is going to actually get utilized better. Where if you have some loose junctions in the gut, there's going to be so much inflammation that it's just not going to make any major impact. So that would be one thing. As far as things, if your gut is A-okay, there's no discernible issue. One of my favorite supplements would be something called Ecolonia cava. Yeah. I want to put that on the front. They can read it for themselves. What I like about that particular supplement is it has a very long biological activity in the body. So typically, if you took some green tea, that's going to have a 30-minute window of activity in your body. But if you're taking something like Ecolonia cava, which is technically a brown seed, it's going to last anywhere from 12 to 14 hours. And it's going to give you incredible plethora of exciting benefits, in my opinion. They just go everything from.
So I'm testing my memory here, but isn't that an MMP9 inhibitor?
It is. You're 100% accurate. Yes, and it just goes really far and wide on the different benefits. For example, it does some things that the laser helmets are known to do. It increases vasoendothelial growth factor, increases relaxing waves in the brain. So when you're ready to go to sleep at night, you're just going to have a greater sense of ease. It's going to reduce cortisol. It does promote the nitric oxide. It actually even inhibits peroxynitrate, which is the dark side of nitric oxide, is one example. So I can go on and on. So that's a real good one if you want to roll the dice on something that might work. Generally, yeah, it's just good to hit them with different angles if you can, and I can give some more if you like, but those are some two strong considerations if you just don't know have a place to start.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Okay, so I think obviously a laser helmet or red light to the scalp, the mist that we developed, and then if you wanted to stack it with some internals, colostrum to heal the gut, which is very logical. And to me, it's very logical that the knock-on benefit is that it's going to improve absorption of other nutrients. You know, if it's going to help mitigate gut dysfunction so that you absorb other nutrients better, then that's a knock-on benefit for sure. And then a Clonia cava, I'm obviously somewhat familiar with. Okay, that's fantastic. So I would, I guess if anybody watches this and if they wanted to reach out to you directly, if they had questions or if maybe they want to do I don't know if you're still doing consults. You know, thankfully, you know, I started losing my hair 16 years ago, and I met you and kind of stopped it in its tracks. So I haven't, you know, needed to visit the forum in quite a long time. So I don't even know like what your status is, but if are you available if somebody wanted to reach out, they had questions, or where can people find you?
All right, yeah. So I still do consultations once in a while. It used to be something I had a heavier load of doing. Part of that has to do with just how the websites are coming and going. Really, definitely not my level of expertise, I could tell you that easily. But I do various different types of health consultations, but I absolutely have a forum that's still going on. And awesome. So, like, there's already a topic on a course on this, RLT Hair Mist or RLT plus Hair Mist. And so, yeah, I've already had some questions. And in fact, so that's going to be probably one avenue that people can get through and maybe have some of their questions answered.
Okay, and the forum, is that immortalhair.org? Is that still the web address?
Yeah, so I can actually probably give you even though that was originally one of the addresses, there's probably some, well, I can just give you a proper link.
Okay, yeah, give me the link. We'll put it in the notes and under the video if people want to go. I really like the forum setup. You know, being able to engage with other members and share stories and you know see what's working for people, what's not working. You know, so it was very beneficial for me. So beneficial that I didn't need to go there anymore. But you and I stayed friends even through all this time, and hence we sit here today talking about this. So Brian, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for making the time and sharing your knowledge. You know, we'll post this to our YouTube channel. We might send an email out to our list to let people know that we had this discussion if they're curious to learn more. And I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your help in developing this. I love using it, so I'm a customer for life of this product because I love using it, and I'm just thankful that you know you were able to put this together for us, and I look forward to working with you in the future on other projects as they come up.
Yeah, it would have been really nice doing this project, Scott. And yeah, thanks for your patience. Obviously, things took a little bit longer than we anticipated, but I'm happy with the results so far.
Yeah, I want to make sure it's done right, not fast. So it did take quite a while, but the end product is fantastic. So that's what matters. All right, thanks, man.
Thank you. Have a good day.